it's the biggest shock to me that you watch the show. That's the thing that shocked me, and that's why you're here. Because, like the first time I was introduced to your stuff it's gotta be like, I'm 31 right now. So it has to have been more than 10 years ago. Because I was at USC.
Yeah.
I was like a sophomore or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I think YouTube is underrated. I actually, like, in life, I'm sort of like, the best thing about YouTube is that you can, like, literally be like, I would like to develop any skill in life, and then there will be a series of videos about it. I mean, like, reading is good too, obviously, but reading is extolled as a virtue in life. Like, everyone's like, you should read a book. It's a good thing to do. But, like, no one is like, you should watch YouTube videos. But I'm like, I've become a massively better cook, and now, like, I realize the corollary of becoming a good cook is becoming good at cleaning, which I'm not so good at. So, like, now I'm watching, like, YouTube cleaning videos, and so I think it's just like it's somehow seeped into my life that I'm like, I guess I'm like a geriatric millennial, so I'm like almost 40. So I'm like, I think, I don't know how I even came across your show, honestly. It was just sort of one of those things where I think it was because someone had told me, like, you had, like, put my website on another one of them, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. But that was a while ago.
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
when I wasn't doing this. I was just doing one-off videos here and there just because I had an idea.
But then I sort of, like, I think it was also because I was living in Basel and I was feeling very lonely for, like, Americans, and so I, like, would, like, put your show on, and, like, whenever I was doing some sort of non-composing work, and be like, there's actually, I think the thing I like about your show is it's almost all people I haven't heard of. You know what I mean? It's
really?
Like, well, I mean, yeah, because it's like a lot of young composers.
Yeah.
Like I don't like I mean, I watch a Timo episode because it's like I know what Timo has to say. Like, I talk to Timo every day. Like, but I was
so nothing he said in that episode was that surprising to you then?
I don't think anything Timo said was
Okay.
surprising.
Because that was the first time I met him.
That's
that was
so
the
funny.
very first time I met him was when I picked him up to do the show.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Timo's great. Obviously, he's one of my dearest friends. No, I like the episodes that are like this random, like, undergrad or like grad student or something who I'm like, I mean, where would I hear like that?
Yeah. Well, that was the reason I want to have people like you on the show. And I've had people like Bruce Broughton, and I've had James Newton Howard also on the show too.
Yeah.
But I've also wanted to have people that are, maybe that are just coming up. I want them all to be part of the discussion.
Right. I guess I was more interested in the fancy people are cool, but I'm like kind of like, oh, what is like this random? I don't know. It's like, it's sort of like keeping your finger on the pulse or something.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I hope to do. So that's why I do so many of them, because there's just so many people to talk to.
Yeah. Or it'll be like someone who I like met randomly a couple, like, well, I know Bobby because he was a student in Peabody.
Bobby G.
Yeah. I can't do that. It's just, I'm intuitively like, or because like.
I think it's G because I think
no,
I
it is
said
G,
it
but
in
like.
front of him. He didn't say anything.
I mean, as myself, as someone who has like an anglicized name, I'm just like, with spending all this time learning how to pronounce Chinese words properly with having a Chinese wife, I'm like, oh, Bobby Koh. And I like learn the tone, and then it'll be like, oh, it's Bobby G. And I'm like, just like when I go to Italy and everyone's like, Cerrone.
Cerrone, yeah. I was just going to ask that. Is it really Cerrone? It's probably not that.
No. And then, but like it was weird because like Switzerland was kind of like the halfway land between Italy and America, but I'd still kind of went with Cerrone. And when I lived there in Rome, I obviously went by Cerrone because I'm not going to be like, actually, it's Cerrone, so I'm kind of like 50-50 on it at this point. I'm totally okay with, but I grew up with this kind of anglicized Cerrone. So I'm like,
Yeah, and people know you by that now, so it's hard to change it now.
I thought about coming back.
Well, I like Cerrone.
I'd come back and be like, from Rome, and I'm like, Cerrone. And of course, like, I would get, made fun of relentlessly by my friends.
No, of course. I mean,
I do have a composer friend who's a film composer named Joe Trapanese.
Oh, yeah, I know about him, yeah.
Yeah, but Joe and I went to undergrad together, and he was definitely Joe Trapanese, and I saw him, and he like somehow said his name somewhat recently, maybe not recently, but I was like, he's like, and he called himself Trapanese, and I was like, you did the thing I want to do, like, and I was so happy because he did it, but I don't have the energy to.
I mean, even with my name, I tell people my name is Saad all the time, but really that's not how you pronounce it, Saad.
Saad. Yeah.
It's hard, and I honestly don't care that much, as long as they call me something, not like, oh, you dirtbag, I'm fine with that.
I think it's also just like, yeah, it's funny because like, yeah, even my wife's name is Carrie, but when she was born in China. Her name was Yi, or Sun Yi, would be her full name, because you say a full Chinese name. And then people are like, I want to call you by your real name. She's like, my real name is Carrie. This is my name. My family chose it for me when we came. So it's just like, you can be overly precious about, like, there's a kind of fetish and authenticity always, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that continues to happen to me as well. But you kind of have to just take it as it goes, like whatever people are comfortable calling you or what they want to call you. Like it's more for them than it is for you a lot of the times.
Where is your family from originally?
Well, my dad is from Jordan. My mom is from Lebanon.
So when you meet like a Jordanian or a Lebanese person, are they like Saad? Or is that Saad?
Well, they could say Saad. That's what they say. But
Okay.
then the next thing they would say is, why don't you speak Arabic with me? It's like, well, I was born in this country and my parents just kind of stopped teaching me Arabic. After I was like 5, like I showed up to preschool and I couldn't talk to any of the kids because I was only speaking Arabic.
Yeah, well, that's like, it's so funny because that's like every immigrant parent's thing where you're just like, they're trying to assimilate so hard, and then you're like, later you're like, I wish my dad would like have talked Italian with me constantly and I could just like do it instead of having to like learn it. I'm just like, you just had to do the language you already speak. But then of course they're all trying to, become American and English and assimilate and all that stuff. And
yeah, of course. I mean, they are trying to do what they think is best for their kids.
But you kind of wish you spoke Arabic.
Of course. And I've taken some lessons here and there and I actually improved a lot. But then when I stopped doing that, it regressed again. You have to keep it up.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I feel like my Italian has hit like a plateau. I had a call with an Italian percussionist, a group in Rome who's doing a new piece of mine, and I described this as we vacillate because his English is not that good and my Italian is like not. I mean, I can speak, but not as well as I would like, and so like we just like we're constantly switching back and forth between Italian and English in the call, and I thought it was like kind of wonderful. I'm like, this is like. Like we both would sort of vacillate between the two, even within a sentence. It was kind of like some kind of magical.
Yeah, but you wish you were just speaking Italian.
Oh, totally. Well, I went to see Jhumpa Lahiri speak last night and she's an Indian American, I guess Bengali, and that was her first language. And then she came to America and basically learned English, as you would imagine, as a child. And then deliberately learned Italian and moved to Italy and now writes in Italian. And then her Italian prose is translated into English. There's actually my friend who was translating it, which is why I was there. But like the idea that you would like go to another country, learn the language and translate into English is sort of wild to me.
Jeez. And I mean, this kind of thing, I mean, it's hard for us to even imagine doing that as Americans too, because we're just like growing up with English all the time.
You're just like,
and that's that's our baseline.
That was like when I was in Switzerland, I was like, oh my God, everyone speaks at least 3 languages. Because like if you're in the German part, everyone speaks English, because it's like when you're a country where there's no neutral language, you all kind of wind up speaking English. And then, most German speaking people speak French, most French speaking people speak German. And so it's just like, default to have 3 languages. And I'm like, Americans default to 1 language.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're obviously doing a lot of stuff with literary text. Like a lot of your pieces do that. And you just finished an opera in a Grove, and it's all basically in English, right? So how did you make a decision to say, okay, I want to write I think all your texts that you choose
I have one piece
is in English, isn't it?
I have a real cassetting from when I was like 19 that I did in German. I just think it's so funny because it's like, I've actually been like, of all things, like I found this like book in my parents' basement of like limericks, which I think like, I don't know how this is like, I don't know who does know or doesn't know, but like, I didn't realize limericks are like dirty always. Like they're like limerick is an inherently like body dirty form. That's like anything not dirty is like not a real limerick.
Like an Irish limerick?
Like a real
Irish limerick.
Yeah, okay. But like the one part of it is that they're just really bawdy and surprisingly like, so I found this book of like incredibly like really really graphic limericks that I won't repeat here, but anyway, but the other thing, it was like a thing in the limerick is like there's always like a off kilter, like there once was a man from Nantucket who and it's like, but there's always a like, you're always deliberately skewing, like an actual kind of internal to the limerick form is actually a kind of mispronouncing to make the rhyme work. all of which is to say, this is like a super roundabout way to say that I think one of the reasons I only work in English is like, I might have like a functional understanding of pronunciation of like Italian or something like that, but I don't feel like I could like bend it. Like I know how when I'm like, you know, it's like when you sort of have Stravinsky with his kind of English settings that sometimes feel bent in the wrong way. Like I felt like it's only in English that I feel like I could send something wrong on purpose or sort of skew a pronunciation with a level of comfort that I know would remain idiomatic to the ears of an English language native. You know what I mean? It's like, I think it's something about the language of the English language, which is super internalized to me. And also that I think that so much of the music that I write feels like in some way or another, it's generated out of the English language.
Mm-hmm. So let's hear an excerpt of what you're talking about there with In a Grove. This is the scene with the outlaw, or it's called The Outlaw, mm-hmm. right? Let's hear it.
Greetings, I call out. There's a grove beyond the entrance to the mine, where folks buried a small fortune. Moonstone, silver, pretty trinkets for the lady. The girl's eyes are far away. Some help digging it up, just a few steps out of the way. The man nods, the man nods, the man nods, but the girl isn't sold. She urges them on. She urges them on. Down the road. She tries again.
Yeah, well, no, with this, I found it fascinating too, because not only are you dealing with the English language, you're dealing with the idea of using electronics, and you're doing it in a way that it's like a Monteverdi on steroids, at least to me. It's like word painting.
Oh yeah, totally.
At an extreme level with what you're doing with the electronics. And I have no idea how it works, and I work with Max MSP all the time.
Yeah. It's all in Max. So I hit a certain point with my electronic stuff where I realized I needed to collaborate with someone. So this programmer, Dave Sanchez, has sort of been doing my Max patches for the last... We worked together, and I'm pretty specific, but with some of that stuff in Grove, I heard this Billie Eilish song called Zanny. I don't know if you know it.
I listen to a lot of Billie Eilish, believe it or not. I listen to a lot of Billie Eilish.
But so you know that song?
I don't know that one.
Oh, there's like I'm in that... Now I can't remember the lyric, but it's like, just drinking canned Coke. And so whenever the bass hits, it distorts her voice with this kind of this amplitude modulation. And so I called Dave and I was like, how do you make this sound? Can you make this sound? And he's like, sure. And so I wound up kind of whipping it up really quickly. And I was like, because I wanted to have this effect of, it was funny because I was thinking about writing this opera. And I think it's sort of, in some ways I painted myself into this corner because I was like, I'm going to have an opera that's just people telling stories. And that's like a pretty radically difficult thing to maintain interest in, especially when the same story happens 3 times. So I was literally like, I need every tool in my toolbook and more to be able to maintain interest and paint the story literally. I mean, Monteverdi on steroids. And so one of the things I was like, oh, well, so this guy has been like, had this, his head's been hit. He's like dizzy. And I wanted to like give this feel of distorted. I think a lot of the piece is about perception, distorted perception. So I wanted to signal to the audience that there was something kind of awry about his perception and to sort of find a way to cast doubt on his accountability without winking into the audience or winking at the audience. So, the first third of the opera I don't think has any vocal processing, but as you get into the real recounting of the important events, everyone has some kind of distortion, delay, reverb on that. I mean, there's only 3 or 4 actual effects in the piece. I think there's like a pitch shift and a granulation effect that Dave also wrote. And I think that is it. It's a pretty limited palette.
No, I noticed the more that I work with electronics, the more that I wish that I did simpler things because those things, number one, they're more practical because they work in a live situation, and number two, oftentimes those things just sound better in general.
Oh, totally. It's actually, the problem is like the problem of getting better at things is you almost wind up you doing more. And then I look back on my older things when I knew how to do less, and I was like, oh, this was way more practical. Like, because my friend Emma O'Halloran has this marimba piece for the electronics, and it's basically just a delay, but it has some kind of little shifts on it and little frequency modulation. But just the fact that I was like, oh, that's so smart, because like you don't even need a click track because you just hit the note and you hear the pace of the you hear the speed of the delay, and that sets the tempo for the piece. And so you don't even have to have a click track. It's really, really, really smart.
Wait, so how does that work exactly?
So she goes like da, it goes like da 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 da. So it's immediately you hit it, you're like da, and you go da, and you hear da da da, and you're like, oh, that's the tempo. Da 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 da.
Oh, then the delay sets the tempo.
The delay sets the tempo, exactly. So you don't
Wow.
even need to think about a click because you're just listening. That it removes one layer of like annoying complexity.
So in your piece, when you're getting, because it happens on like this kind of distortion effect, happens on the girl's eyes are, I think, far away. I think that's what he says.
Yeah.
But is somebody like timing that?
Yeah,
or does the computer know that
there's a
it's-
musician who is basically running. There's about 300 cues in the piece in the max patch, so it's pretty. It requires a dedicated musician just to do triggering.
This is like my favorite line from your program note. You write, I just laughed at it because I have had this experience so many times myself where you had this line saying that I don't remember exactly. I'll put it up on the screen now, but you write that you require a mixing engineer that is just as I don't know what the word. There was a word you used that just made me laugh. That is just as good, but you didn't say just as good as or at the same level as the musicians and the singers playing the piece. And I just laughed when I saw that because I remember so many times when I would show up and like the mixing engineer can't read a score, doesn't really know what they're listening to.
You know, I workshopped that phrasing quite a bit with a few friends because I was sort of going as the model of I can't remember his name now. It's Kurt. I'm going to bungle his last name, so I'm not going to say it. Who's a member of the Philip Glass Ensemble, and Philip Glass Ensemble always toured with one dedicated sound person, and I think he's a member of the ensemble. So I think I said something like that because I think it was initially like a very negative phrasing. It was like the engineer must not be like an idiot. I was like the engineer must like be isn't as important as a member of the ensemble as everyone else.
I think that's the wording you used. Yeah. But I can kind of not. I mean, it's just because I've been in that situation. I think anybody else wouldn't have thought a second about it, because I've been in that situation before. I'm like, I get why he put this in here.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it works, but it's
right.
You know, and I feel like at that point I'm like, it costs a lot of money to make an opera. You know, the ensemble is pretty small. It's only 9 musicians. It's really, you know, a lot of operas have 15, 20 musicians, you know, in the orchestra or a full orchestra. I'm like, we can all afford one person doing the triggering of you know, and it does take a certain skill set. It's a little bit like being a page turner. I was talking to students about page turning the other day. That makes sense. Yeah, so it was kind of, I remember we did it in Chicago, it was like one of the more stressful things was this poor girl was sort of reading off the score, and she had this, like, I was like, you got to get it right, you know, because it was like, you know, when you make a mistake with electronics, it's just a lot more glaring. Yeah. Or maybe it's not, but it's glaring to me.
Actually, it's funny. I had a few years ago when I was with the Albany Symphony, I had this crazy piece. Again, this is another situation where I did something that was way more complicated than it needed to be. But I had my wife triggering all the events in the piece because we didn't have an extra musician there.
I wish I could teach Carrie to do that. I don't think that's great.
But you know, because we didn't put in the technical writer or whatever you want to call it, that there had to be an extra musician dedicated to doing the electronics.
Why didn't you do it?
I wanted to be out in the hall to hear it because it was the premiere, and I didn't. Otherwise, I would be way in the back, and I can't hear anything going on.
Yeah. I did that with my piece for the LA Phil, but they were very like, they wanted this piece called "The Insects Became Magnetic," and that they were like, we really want you to be on stage. I think they liked. It was funny. It's the worst place for the composer to be in terms of the performance because I was like running back and forth frantically between the stage and like off stage. We just did this piece over the summer at this festival in Oregon called the Brit Festival, and that time I also was doing the cueing, and I also would sort of have no idea. I would have to kind of just like cut out for some of the runs, but then the piece was done in Berlin this year as well, and that time they had actually hired someone to do it, to do the cueing, and it was so much better because I was just sitting in the back giving balance comments, and I wasn't worrying about triggering stuff.
Well, I mean, there's the piece that I was introduced to. That's how I knew your music was a piece that didn't need any of this. Didn't need any extra people cueing anything. I mean, it was kind of like in the box, and that's the piece Hoyt Schermerhorn for solo piano. So I wanna play a couple minutes of this.
Great.
I don't know if people realize, but I have no idea what we're going to talk about before we start the show. So we've been on this electronics train for the last few minutes or so, but it's great.
Well, I think it's somehow still missing in like composer education or something, but I do think it's getting there. But certainly when I was like coming up, there was like a electronics like a composer of electronic music, and then like acoustic music, and there was like not that many people who'd like literally, like mine is probably like somewhere half and half or like a third, 2/3. I don't even know. But in terms of you would be sort of defined as an electronic composer or not very early, I think, in kind of Western composing education.
So for you, I mean, this is unusual for me. I don't usually put older pieces, 2010 being an old piece in this context, but it's a personal piece for me. It's a selfish reason I wanted this piece on, because that's how I got to know your music, got to know you. But when you wrote this piece early on, were you labeled? Did you start to get labeled as, okay, this is an electronics guy, or
so I think,
did you have that problem back then?
I think early on, sort of in my education, I was not an electronics guy. Like I went to the Manhattan School of Music. We had like kind of one broken corner room, like barely, and I got a C in electronic music. I think there's a very long story behind that, but suffice to say, I did not get along with the professor there, and they used this program called Kima. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's kind of like a Max Lite, plus it requires like an incredibly expensive outboard unit. It was very stupid, and so I refused to learn it. So I just kept, because I was like, I'm going to learn Max. I'm going to learn anything. So I like got a C because I basically never learned the program. But all of which is to say that then I went to grad school, and then I kind of stumbled or lied my way into a job at the electronic music studio, because I was like, oh yeah, sure, I know what I'm talking about here. And of course I had no idea. But the studio sort of forced me to just be in an environment where I had to like learn how to plug in. I mean, I was sort of saying it's crazy that you can go through music school and not know how to like plug in a mic and record something. I mean,
easily.
Maybe the pandemic changed that, but I don't think so, actually.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I can tell you this: at Columbia, we have the Computer Music Center, but I really was in there,
right? Actually,
even though I know a little bit about electronics, I myself wasn't. It was never required to really be there.
Yeah.
So if I'm like that, I'm sure there are a lot of others like that going through the program.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of always makes you wonder, what are the limits of your world? Like, sort of like, I don't know. I think that a lot of people can exist in this world where they don't even know if they want to write electronic music or not, because they're not sort of their sort of epistemic universe as composers is acoustic instruments, and they might just be like, oh, that stuff, it's complicated, whatever, or like it's messy or it's annoying. So they don't even know what their universe is. And that was kind of me until I sort of wound up playing around. And actually it became part of my practice as a composer more, that I would use the studio to compose. And sort of I was really chafing at the limits of like kind of notation programs. So I think the first thing was just like, how am I composing? And so I think, I don't know if I'm a little bit older than you, but I always feel like there was this kind of hierarchy of I write in my head, on a piece of paper, and then like, by the time I got to school, writing at the piano was okay. And I was kind of like, well, I feel like to achieve a lot of the sounds I was going for, I felt I actually needed a studio. So I wound up just little by little using the computer as a compositional tool. So I would sort of write these things where there would be, a lot of my stuff in grad school are kind of non-aligned elements. So, I'd be like, oh, what does it sound like when two pianos are playing these elements that don't line up and speed up at different rates? And so things that chafed against the kind of grid in a lot of ways. And so the first thing was just sort of writing in the computer, even if I was writing acoustic music. And that was kind of a lot of me in grad school.
When you say writing in the computer, you mean writing into a
like
DAW?
No, yeah, exactly, like writing into a DAW.
Yeah, because
exactly.
with this piece, it's like I can't even imagine like going into Sibelius or something and just plotting these.
No,
notes down
it was
randomly
written by me recording layer upon layer of myself, and then making someone else play all the layers at the same time.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then it's almost like you're making the score after the piece is done.
Right. And so anyway, so I finished grad school and I'm still writing mostly acoustic music, and then I'm I don't know if that has happened to you, where I guess you're just finishing school now, but
just finished
a
few months ago, barely out.
You're in the taper off of grad school, when I sort of got out of grad school at like 24, 25, I was writing all these large ensemble things, and like I didn't have any like commissions. I was sort of like writing for my friends, and I was like, I really wanted this big sonic palette. So I think there was this moment, I think I wrote a very short piece for Load Bang, where it was like Load Bang and like a bunch of processed sine waves, just played along with the track. And so
Load Bang, baritone,
bass clarinet, trombone, tuba. It's like you make this ensemble.
No, not tuba.
Trumpet.
Trumpet.
Yeah. And I'm like, you make this ensemble blend. I can't do it. Like, so, but how I blended it was this layer of sine waves. And so I think that was like, basically I was out of school. I wanted a really large sonic palette. I was thinking of myself as a large sonic palette person, and electronics was just like, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to create. And I think the need for a certain kind of sound world was really the thing that inspired me to start working with electronics at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I feel the same way. Although I feel like the older I get, the less electronics I use, just because I am getting so frustrated with implementing them. It feels like it's not getting any better.
No, this new thing I'm doing is insane. It's like it's new piece for 8 voices with like 130 cues and like live processing on all 8 voices, and it's like, but after
serious?
Yeah. This is a new piece that'll premiere next month with Lorelei Ensemble, and there's video, and the video has to get triggered. But I didn't do the video, but that piece kind of broke me in terms of the complexity, and I was just like, for a while, nothing. And for a while, everything I've written since then has been acoustic, and I finished that like in March mostly.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, with this, not to harp on this piece, the Hoyt piece, but it was the first time I actually wrote a paper too about a contemporary piece. And I remember sending you I've sent you the research paper, whatever it was, a 5-page thing, and you had some comments. I actually don't remember what the comments were. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't find the paper. But, it's funny because this piece also gets into aesthetics too, because it's not just using the electronics, but also the aesthetics of what you're doing. Because, you're writing, and you clearly have a style that kind of started in some ways with that piece.
Totally. Yeah, it was still, I feel like in grad school I was like playing around with like, probably in undergrad I was quite a modernist. I was writing kind of more astringent, sort of, I wouldn't say atonal, but atonal-ish, much more modern and much more European influenced music. And so, I was sort of dealing with that influence, and then kind of thinking a lot about spectralism, and which still is very informing my music. And then like thinking a lot about Feldman and sort of the New York School and Cage. And I think that before that I was sort of processing these in this very kind of untotally digested ways. And that was the first piece where I was like, and I wrote it really fast. I remember, and it was kind of a mess because I wrote this bizarre graphic score where it was like 3 of a certain size. I mean, we're talking about not being able to write something in Sibelius, but it was like 3, and you would play any notes, and then you would have these processes hidden within, that. And so, I showed it to Timo, and Timo was, because I was living with him at the time, Timo Andrus, and he was like, yeah, this is great. Like, maybe get rid of the indeterminate stuff. Just like...
He said that?
Totally.
Oh, man.
He was pretty...
funny looking back now.
He was very discouraging of the... He's like, all of this is cool except the notes you didn't pick.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, you're kind of right, honestly. Like, I needed that process to get to the notes, but then it's sort of... I think there's a big thing. It's so funny because I fight with my students about this all the time now, but I'm like, why don't you just write it out? And they're like, well, I want to give freedom to the performers. And I'm like, I can assure you the performers, unless they're a very special rare breed, do not want any freedom. They
don't want freedom. They just want to play what's in front of them.
They want to be able to, I mean, it's a little bit like, I mean, it's like cooking or something, and you're like, oh, like, you don't hand someone like a cucumber and like a pickle, and I don't even know, like a steak, and then some a bunch of random ingredients. You're like, make a meal. You're like, no, I want a recipe. Like, give me a recipe, then I'll make the meal.
Yeah, or if you bought a book, you bought the score, you bought the book, and
exactly.
and the book says, oh, just use cucumbers.
Or it's like you bought a cookbook, and it's like, just express yourself.
Right,
it's just like, no, I don't express myself. I want to
musicians, especially conservatory musicians, have a very hard time with
that. And if you do want them to do something, you have to be incredibly specific. So I sort of took my own advice and wound up notating I wrote all the notes out, and I think I did pick the best chords at the end of the day. And so then...
I would agree.
Thank you. And so then the electronic element sort of came at the end when I was sort of thinking that I often feel like I was thinking about how one of the big problems with electronics is like once they come in, like all you want to hear is electronics. So I was like, well, then I'm going to save them for this special moment. And so I was messing around with this program that does definitely not exist anymore called Audio Mulch, which was the program that Girl Talk, and if you remember Girl Talk, he's like this mashup DJ who would chop up like hip hop and pop songs, and sort of, it was a very kind of aughts moment of techno optimism, that probably now would be seen as cultural appropriation. But at the time he was using this program called Audio Mulch that had this granulator in it, and so the first couple of performances I was using Audio Mulch to trigger these electronics, and I was like, oh, actually, not most people don't own this program. And so I finally found like a granulator that someone had made, and eventually just had a custom one made. But it was sort of a funny process of like, it was a moment of professional reckoning where suddenly people were like, oh, I want to play this piece. And I'm like, I don't know how you're going to play this piece. I hadn't even thought that through. It was still, it was like, it was so I was totally unemerged in my brain that like you would have to distribute the music somehow. And so it took a minute to figure it out. But then that's when I settled on Max, just because it's very easy to send around.
And that piece is still being sent out with Max.
That piece is played all the time. It's probably one of my most people. And actually, it's funny. I just made a version of the piece that doesn't require live processing, because I had met this friend in Germany. He's like, I love your piece, Hoyt Schermerhorn, but I hate live processing. Like, would you consider making a version without live processing? So I wound up making a version where like I took the live piano sounds and pre-processed them, and they wound up being a series of cues that are triggered.
Does it work?
I think so. I'll send it to you. You can tell me.
I'm actually curious. Yeah. I mean, I guess on a recording it would work just as well. I would assume, but in the live setting, I wonder if it works just as well.
I haven't sent it to my publisher yet. My friend Dan is playing it in October. That's now in San Antonio, and he told me it's working fine. And Kai, this friend in Germany, also. Yeah, so I think it's like maybe slightly less of the platonic ideal. I mean, that is like a whole other topic of like, why do we idealize live electronics? It's something that I feel is very composer brained and not.
This is ingrained in me as well.
Yeah, it's like it's better, right? It's like.
Yeah, because I have this piece too that I just had a conversation with this guy that plays trumpet in Oregon, and he wants to play my piece that has electronics, and we couldn't figure out how to make the patch work. And this is a piece that's like 8 years old,
right?
And it was. I was like, I got to spend a whole day fixing this, and I don't have a whole day.
I've been there no, it's so funny. I remember I once had a lesson with the now late great Saariaho, and I was showing her my work, and I was like, what was it like to write all these incredibly important pieces of electronics? And I just remember she was like, So I have to update the patches all the time. It's such a pain.
You want to know a funny story about that?
Yeah.
It's funny because I was just telling my wife about this earlier today. I don't know how it came up, but it's good that we're talking about Saariaho, actually. We haven't talked about her on the show yet. She passed away recently,
Yeah,
last few
terribly
months.
sad.
But I was last second called in a few years before the pandemic. She was like being honored at the Juilliard graduation. Mm-hmm. This was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago or so. I don't remember, but it was before the pandemic. And there was this piece. I don't know if you know this piece for harp and electronics.
Oh yeah, Fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that piece.
And
I teach it
there
every
was somebody
semester.
playing that piece for the graduation, but they couldn't get the max patch to work. And I was already graduated, and they have a tech department there that handles these things, but nobody could figure out how to get it to work.
Many such cases, as our former president would say.
Basically what happens, I get a call like, this thing is happening in 3 hours. Can you do it? I'm like, I don't know. I get the patch. I don't know. I can't even look. I'm looking at it. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but they offered like $75 an hour or something. So, okay, I'll come. I'll see what I can do. And if not, they'll just, they didn't have another option.
Right.
So I show up there and Ara Guzleiman is there, the dean of Juilliard. I'm like, oh crap. And I didn't realize that this was like a real gig. I show up there, open the computer, just literally plug it in, like very basic stuff. And I tell her play, and it works.
Oh yeah.
Like 15, 20 minutes. And R is like really happy, And I'm like, so do I need to stay, or are you guys good? Like, can I go home? It's like, yeah, go. Like, let's call Saariaho here. So then I leave and she comes, basically, but I didn't get to meet her actually.
Oh, really?
I get home and I bill the full 3 hours. It was like 200 and I don't remember something dollars.
Yeah.
Because I like stopped the whole day for this. And then I get a text back from somebody at the Juilliard department, like one of I think the tech department. He said, "Oh, do you know how to do math?"
So they wanted to charge you. They wanted
me to be billed like
8
I don't
minutes?
know, like for let's say 30 minutes of my
That's
time
ridiculous.
or something crazy. But I ended up getting the money. I got all the
You
money.
could have been like, I
asked
can
for.
undo the work if you want me to.
I'm like, literally, this was like, you had no other choice.
That's also like
right?
chicken scratch for Juilliard. It's doing $250. They can afford it.
Looking back on it, I'm like, that was nothing for them because it was a big deal. It
Exactly.
was a graduation.
No, exactly.
Saariaho was there. She was getting honored. It was crazy.
Well, it's just that, the thing is that this is just always an afterthought, and that's why it's a problem. If it's not an afterthought, and a lot of European ensembles now, I feel like just have a member who's an electronics person. And when I just had my piece done in Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago, there's this group, Love Music, and they just have a member of the group who's the electronics person. And I just think that's the only way for it really to go forward as an art form.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that happens. I'm still kind of
American groups are not so integrated yet. I feel like Europeans are, because they often have like a major or something. You can be I don't know. I just find I have much less issues on this very thing, is that someone knows how to use Max and can handle it. And in the US, it's always like an afterthought, and some random person's like trying to do it themselves. I mean, I have my most complicated kind of live electronics piece is this piece called Liminal Highway, and my friend Tim commissioned it, and that's really like a piece that needs 2 people, and he's been trying to do it by himself, but it's just real. And of course they're like, so we worked together really hard on it, and literally like he was like, and he got everything working, but then he's like, they gave me a 6-minute sound check for your 20-minute piece with like live processing, and I'm like, well, that's going to be what it's going to be,
Yeah, it's just not going to work out. Yeah.
No.
So what happens with you then when you're working on a piece like Hoyt, Schermerhorn, you're working on In a Grove, you're working on these pieces with a lot of electronics, but then you work on a piece like your piece like Don't Look Down. I keep calling it Don't Look Up because of that movie, that stupid movie that we all watched. But I know yours came first. But you get to a piece like that, there's no electronics at all in that whole thing, but it still has the same kind of aesthetics that we still know it's a Cerrone or Cerrone work, we still know that it's part of your thing, and it still has this huge sonic spectrum that we're used to from your music. We hear it in that. So I want to play a couple minutes of this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd say the line between how I work electronically and acoustically is so blurred because my process now is almost entirely that I work directly into a DAW. I compose the entire piece in the DAW.
Really?
And then I make a score
I'm
after.
actually shocked. I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, no, it's totally, it's like,
So it's like the John Adams method. Isn't that how he works?
no, because he's working into like Sibelius and playing back in like a DAW or whatever. But
Oh, I
like,
thought he works straight in the sequencer.
maybe he does. I don't know. I haven't.
I don't know. I've never stood over his shoulder while
I
he's
think
writing
John's mostly
either.
still working with like MIDI being triggered in like a score writing program. But no, but I found it really freeing. I found it really freeing to not think about the score initially or necessarily even who's playing what, and then figure it out later in terms of. So I mean, the way I wrote that piece is I was really right before the pandemic too. But I remember I went up to Connor Hannock, the pianist on this. I've been him at Juilliard actually, where he teaches, and we sort of went through every cool sound he could think of, and we recorded all of them. And then I went to Sandbox's studio and we recorded like every sound in their studio. And so I just built all these samplers.
Sandbox Quartet, the percussion quartet.
Exactly. Yeah, I should say who commissioned the piece. So I would sort of just find these sounds that I found to be really, really interesting. And I sort of would, especially with like, how on earth do you write for prepared piano? Like, do you imagine the sound? It's like, no, I entirely was just sort of, I sort of figured out what the keyboard would be, and I just had my little prepared piano keyboard. And actually that piece
So is that sampled? Is it like sampled?
I mean, not in the recording or live,
Okay,
but when I wrote it, that's how I wrote it.
Got it. Okay.
That piece is interesting because not only, I mean, in terms of electronics, there's this trick I have that I've been using a lot lately with specific kind of rhythmic things where I just like mash my hand on the keyboard like very chaotically, and then I just like force it onto a grid with like a quantizing mechanism. So like,
Really?
so I'm just like I'll just be like totally unmeasured, totally out of time. And then I force it all onto a 16th note grid just by like hitting like the quantize button. And then as a result of that, you get these kinds of really stuttery rhythms that are like pop, 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 pop. It's like a way of creating a non-repeating groovy thing.
Well, this was exactly what I was going to ask you
Yeah.
next, actually. I was going to ask you, how do you come up with your rhythms? And now I'm like, wait, it's almost like you tore off the, what do you call it? The package. It's like, wait, that's how you do it?
It's so funny because it's like you go back to these things. You think about John Cage, right? You think about, not in terms of prepared piano, but his desire to kind of use a method, to get away from himself, right? He's getting away from his own tendencies. And sometimes I try to force myself into a scenario where like some kind of accident will, like I'm always very mindful of accidents. And that was an accident, that the first time it happened. I wasn't like, how shall I mash my hand against the keyboard as a process? I was just sort of like, I think I had set a track to quantize for one reason or another. And I was just like, mashed my hand on the keyboard and I was like, wow, that is really cool sounding,
And then you figured out what the rhythm was after that.
Yeah, but I mean, I just literally like printed out the MIDI and then
Transcribed it, basically.
transcribed it, and then I sent it to Connor, and then like we had to figure out, well, like it wasn't always possible as a result. I'd send him a draft being like, what can you do here? And so he wound up rewriting that piano. And since so much of the piano part was kind of percussive sounds, it wasn't like terribly important if it was like A or A sharp, because it would be like click or like, it's not super pitched. So we wound up kind of a lot of what I do now kind of works that way, where I collaborate closely with the performer. Keyboard eye is a thing that I thought through in a DAW.
I mean, so like this is the problem I have. So I don't know, like the last couple shows, I don't remember what show I was talking about. We had this huge discussion about rhythm because I was saying, I have no idea how I pick my rhythms. It feels like, it literally feels like I'm not making a decision that I picked. Like with my pitches, I feel like
choosing your rhythm. What do you
I don't
mean?
know. It's just random. It's just like improvising, but not in any planned way, like I do with my pitches. With my pitches, I sit there, I plan them out. I really think about, these are the pitches I want. These are the harmonies I want. Even the form, I'm like, this is the form I want. But with rhythm, when it comes to rhythm, it's like it could be anything.
That's really,
And but with you, I'm like, I hear the piece, right? I'm like, that is inevitable. The rhythm. I'm talking about rhythm on a micro level.
Yeah.
It's inevitable that it sounds like that. But now you're telling me it wasn't inevitable.
Well, you realize that it's basically like a kind of statistical thing where like once you get within a kind of algorithmic landscape of like, as long as you have a certain number of notes played within a grid, it's like all, I don't know. I had this whole thought about rhythms the other day. It was a very like weird, like walking to the train thought, but I was like, our classical, whatever, composerly culture values so much like subdivisions of the notes that are not but like so little for like like a quintuplet is like smart or a septuplet is smart, and I'm sort of thinking about how many cultures have these incredibly sophisticated rhythms that are all based on kind of things within this 16th note grid. And I thought that was like, it's because and I was thinking the whole training of classical musicians other than percussionists is they don't really know how to play rhythms either.
No, and when I was at Juilliard, our ear training class was split into two, basically. Like we would do the Dandolo, which is like this sight reading thing, and then we would do this rhythm training book. And for whatever reason, like the people that had perfect pitch and could, they could sing anything you throw at them, they couldn't for the life of them clap and taw a rhythm. They couldn't do it.
That's so wild.
Right?
I mean, I think it's not a skill set that's necessarily drilled into us nearly as well as pitches. You know what I mean? Like most musicians, I would say rhythm is usually not the strongest skill set unless you're like a percussionist or like a new music person. Like if you can get through, so much more music life with relatively low rhythmic skills as compared to your intonation. Like you have to play the violin, your intonation has to be so incredibly good. Like I don't know how anyone plays the violin and plays in tune. It's insane to me. Like you're up here, you're playing this note in tune. Like how do you do that?
Well, they have to do that first.
Right, exactly.
Right?
But
otherwise it's like, it doesn't matter if you're playing the right rhythms.
They try to play a triplet and it's like da, 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 da.
I'm scared to death. You should see the piece I just finished for LA. It's like all the string parts are whole notes. And that's the LA Phil.
Well, that's its own strategy. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I just think that if we actually sort of trained musicians to be as rhythmically adroit as we train them to be intonationally adroit or whatever, like music might look really different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember it was a while back you did this like interview, or I don't know what it was exactly, but it was a really well edited video with David Bruce.
Oh yeah,
and you guys were talking about quintuplets and how to like why you need to do that versus that. And I just found it fast. First of all, I was just having you two guys talk to each other was a shock. I was like, wait, how did this happen?
Well, David, I met him outside of the Skirball Center at NYU. We were having our operas read at this old New York City Opera Festival. It was so fantastic. And he bummed a cigarette off of me when I was, smoking as an undergraduate, which I obviously stopped long ago. But, that was the beginning of a great friendship then. And we see each other whenever we're, kind of near each other in the same place. And he's such a fabulous guy and fantastic composer too. But it was a very long, and then much later after that did he start doing his whole YouTube channel thing.
Oh, you didn't know him before that?
No, I did know him.
Thing. I mean, you knew him before the YouTube thing, but you didn't know he was doing YouTube.
I knew he was doing it when I started, same as you, just sort of like just clicking around and stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is really good. He's really good at it.
Yeah. But it was just funny to see you there because it's like two worlds colliding. And I had no idea where the connection was.
Yeah, it was a bum cigarette outside the Skirball Center at NYU in 2009.
And then he just saw that you were working with quintuplets. And so
we just kept track of each other. And
okay.
And we've continued to be, and I will say that like often that's when you're writing, that's the biggest limitation is you're thinking about like, I don't know, I was like doing this like, subdivided to 6 bars with the triplets. And at some point I was like, well, if I keep this all in 4, it'll actually get played, And
yeah. I've had pieces where I literally had to rewrite the time signatures like 3 or 4 times.
Oh yeah.
And it was hell every time. Like, oh my God, it still doesn't work. I got to do it again. It still doesn't work. I don't know if you had those things happen to you.
I remember I had a very early lesson with a teacher of mine, Nils Vigeland from college. And my very first lesson was this piece that I had written in like 7/8, alternating with 3/8, with 5/8 and stuff. And he just like, the first lesson, he literally was like, there's your piece. It's in 4/4. And I was like, it's one of those like jaw on the, great teacher moments where you're just like, oh, that's much better. Like,
so, I mean, now that you transitioned into the teacher role, I mean, how is it now? Like, because I mean, you graduated a while ago. I mean, from Yale, right? You did your DMA. Yeah. How long ago was that? So
I got my DMA in 2014, but like we have that non-resident thing where you're, I actually like haven't lived in New Haven since 2010. And then the next part of the degree is that you go out into the real world and like build a career or whatever. And you send them like a portfolio of all your, I mean, it's sort of the opposite of the Columbia thing because it's really like very real world oriented. And so the only way to get the degree is you have to send in like a portfolio of like I don't know, however many concerts and compositions you've written, and you have to get 5 letters of recommendation from non-academics. You're not allowed to get a professor to give you a recommendation letter. And so then I'd like my publisher write a letter, and maybe like some kind of administrator from an orchestra or something like that. So yeah, I finished in 2010 my resident portion, but then the next 4 years I was just living in New York.
But you were teaching then as well?
No, I mean, I taught when I was in residence through 2010, just as like a TA, but I really didn't teach at all from 2010 till like 2019 or something like that.
You're saying that at 2014, officially finishing the degree, right?
Right. And well, I got out of school in 2010, really, even though I was doing this non-resident thing. I think I applied for like a few teaching jobs, but it did not go well. And it was kind of like the height of the, Great Recession. And there was like, no one was hiring me. And then I think I also didn't really want to teach at that moment. I sort of had some bad experiences in grad school, not with my actual composition professors, who were all astonishingly wonderful people, but just I think the whole kind of structure of getting my DMA, I was sort of very turned off by, what I felt was like the kind of all the stuff that sucks about school, like the bureaucracy, the kind of the managing of people who are, let's say not as great at music as your cool composition professors or whatever. And so just, I remember I got this letter from, when you finish your doctorate at Yale, you literally get this letter being like, how you did. And I'm like, you've graduated, you're done. And there's a letter in the mail, which is like, you could really bone up on your 19th century German romanticism or something. And I was
they would be that specific?
No, yes, that was like in the letter, And so I think I don't want to say it left a bad taste in my mouth, but it left me being like, I need to go away from academia for a long time. I don't actually feel like I want to think about that at all. I want to think about hip hop. I want to think about, Aphex Twin. I want to think about everything but that. And so, and also, but much, much more importantly than that was just sort of some slightly sour grapes. I didn't think I had anything to say. I'm like, what, you go to grad school and you get some student performances and then you're supposed to be a professor of music composition? I mean, that's like ludicrous. I remember like, imagine teaching orchestration and you'd never worked with an orchestra. I mean, how could that possibly be? You need to have real world experience. And so I was pretty much like, okay, I'm going to put the teaching thing on the shelf. I'm glad I got my doctorate, but I'm not even going to consider this as a real possibility professionally. And that was the other thing. I was like, all my heroes are like Steve Reich, Philip Glass, Charles Ives, Morton Feldman, Meredith Monk. These are not people who are academics, and I felt that I just needed to put the academic, and I feel like there's a kind of, like the epistemology of the world of an academic composer, trying or not, open or not, is always going to be limited by the kind of the purview and the priorities of kind of what do you do to get a job? What kind of music do you write to get a job? And you might not be there sitting at your desk being like, if I had another quarter tone, I'll definitely get a job. But it's there. It's subconscious. And I wasn't trying to pursue that at all. So I just did my thing. And then kind of like almost 10 years, and I would do like student visits and do random teaching things. And so I wasn't hostile to the idea, but, and I wound up giving a lecture at Peabody maybe in 2017 or 2018 at the invitation of the school. And I took the train down and I like hung out and like gave a talk, and it was like such a great environment, a really wonderful place. And I wrote the chair at the time, and I was like, it's kind of maybe a little presumptuous, but if you ever need someone, like I do have a DMA, and he's like, well, actually Kevin Putz is like taking off next year to write the hours. Do you want to like take over his job? And I was like, sure. And so I wound up going down there, and I discovered at that point, 10 years later, that I loved teaching and I loved doing it.
Teaching composition.
Exactly. I taught his private studio, and I just found it was just something that actually brought me a lot of happiness. And at this point, 10 years of working with all these places, I did actually have something to say. And, it's a little halting at first to figure out how to teach composition. It's a delicate dance, in terms of how much do you say, how much do you not say. But so anyway, the year ends and the pandemic hits, and then the year ends, and Kevin comes back to his job, and so that ends there. But I started actually taking it a little bit more seriously, the idea of teaching. And then again, every job I've gotten has always been by weird chance. So then I think it was like maybe on like Facebook or something, the dean of Manus, Richard Kessler, like heard some of my music and that Ian Rosenbaum had posted, and he was like, this is great. And then I wrote the chair, David Little, kind of unrelatedly being like, hey, again, like if you ever need someone, I'm like in New York, I'm around. And so I think they brought me on to teach one class and then kind of more. And then they appointed me to the composition faculty. And now I'm, there
Now
a
you're
lot.
there.
I'm there a lot. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's crazy because it's a very different path to what composers now are saying. Because I just finished my doctorate program, and everybody that's finishing is like head for like sending applications. That's immediately, or even I sent applications before I was done. I was ABD, dissertation, and I was sending in applications too because there was like this thing, like what you were saying.
Yeah.
I gotta get a job. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
even if
it's
you
hard
don't
to
really
be a
want a
composer.
job.
There's not a lot of avenues, so it's not like I'm disdainful. I was just like, I will be poor and deal with it. It's like I was thinking about that line from Morrissey, where it's like, I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now. And I wonder if that should be the default path for composers. And I mean, no shade to people who teach early on. It's fine. I just think mine was very, very kind of circuitous. And it's funny, I have applied for things and I have never once gotten an interview. That's actually not actually technically true, but until, very, very few times in my life had I ever actually gotten a call back. So every time I've gotten a job, it's literally been like, someone has called me up and be like, do you want a job? And I'm like, sure. But anytime I applied for a job, it would be like, no response.
Well, especially around that time when you finish the doctorate, because that's when most people are sending in.
But even later on, I never
applications.
got any interviews anywhere.
Yeah. No, it was weird because I got a couple, I even went to a place in person. I'm like, and I thought to myself, what am I doing here? Because number one, really, am I going to be teaching these kids? I just finished. I know I have some experience, but still,
Totally.
I need to go out and do my own thing too. So even in the back, like once you get that experience of actually being there, like this can be a possibility, then the opposite thoughts start to creep up. Like, wait, should I actually be doing this or not?
Well, I was thinking about this. Is like, if you get a teaching job and you say at 25, 30, even 30, right? Like,
let's say 30.
Let's say 30. Are you going to teach composition for 50 more years
right?
or something? Like, it's a wild notion. I mean, there's a lot of life to live, and, and I know that, like, maybe this is not true of teaching, but, people are obsessed with like going to grad school, getting a DMA, getting funding. I'm like, guys, it's not that hard to earn $30,000 a year. It's not, like there are other ways in life.
There are easier ways to make $30K a year.
Yeah, it's not that. I mean, if they're paying you $200,000 to go to Columbia, like, great. But, it is okay to like get a job and just figure it out. I mean, when I graduated, I was like teaching some piano lessons and engraving music and doing live sound and piecing it all together. And it was scary, but it was fantastic and so much fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, me personally, I was lucky, especially before the pandemic, because I was getting a lot of orchestra stuff, as I was doing my master's at Juilliard. I never really had to go and say, okay, I need to do engraving, I need to do all this stuff, So for me, I was lucky in that regard. So I like looking back, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I don't really need to do this, that, and that, but there is a bit of luck involved, I think, when you get out of school and you have gigs ready to go.
I think honestly, almost all of the professional life, I say this to my students all the time. I'm like, you never know what's going to be the thing. So say yes. And you can't plan what the thing is going to be, but something will happen to you that will be an opportunity. And then the key is to like make the most of that opportunity.
And I can't say anything better than that.
Right.
So thanks for doing this, man.
Of course, really, really
fun.
fun.
Next time.
Yeah, totally.